The encounter. The Zorathian city of Kalos towered against the twin suns, its spires shimmering like molten glass. Emma Carter tightened the straps of her tactical jacket, her heart pounding as the diplomatic shuttle descended into the alien metropolis. As a representative of Earth, she had been sent to broker peace with the Zorathians, a species that had been humanity's enemy for nearly a decade. But this mission was far from routine. The air thrummed with danger, and her instincts told her that something wasn't right. The Zorathians were a proud and enigmatic race, their glowing eyes and ridged skin making them seem otherworldly. Emma had studied their culture for months, but nothing had prepared her for the imposing figure of General Fralick, the leader of their military forces. He stood at the head of a delegation waiting on the landing pad. His stern gaze locked on her as she stepped out of the shuttle. "Welcome to Kalos," Fralick said, his voice a deep rumble. "We hope this meeting will be productive." Emma forced a polite smile, ignoring the sharp glances from the Zorathian guards surrounding her. "The hope for peace is mutual, General." As the group made their way into the Grand Hall, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Her eyes flicked to the side, and there he was, a Zorathian male standing apart from the others, his tall frame cloaked in shadow. His golden eyes seemed to pierce through her, and for a moment the noise around her faded. Who was he? And why did he look at her like that? The meeting began with stiff formalities, the air thick with tension. Emma presented her proposals for a ceasefire, but she could tell the Zorathians were skeptical. As the hours dragged on, she found her attention drifting back to the mysterious figure. He stood silently at the edge of the room, his gaze unwavering. When the meeting finally adjourned, Emma stepped outside to get some air. The alien city stretched endlessly, its streets filled with glowing lights and strange sounds. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until it was too late. "You shouldn't be here alone, human." Emma spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the small communicator in her pocket. The Zorathian from earlier stood before her, closer than she expected. Up close, she could see the intricate patterns on his skin, almost like living tattoos. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Who are you?" "Reichel," he said simply, his eyes scanning the shadows around them. "And you're Emma Carter, the human diplomat." Emma's eyes narrowed. "You know who I am, but I don't know why you're following me." Reichel's expression softened, and for a brief moment, Emma thought she saw a flicker of concern. "There are those who would rather see you dead than see peace," he said. "You're in more danger here than you realize." Before Emma could respond, a sharp noise cut through the air, a high-pitched whine that sent chills down her spine. Reichel grabbed her arm and pulled her behind a nearby column just as a laser blast scorched the ground where she had been standing. "Stay down," Reichel commanded, drawing a weapon from his belt. Emma's breath caught in her throat as more blasts rained down around them. She peeked out to see a group of masked attackers closing in, their weapons trained on her. Whoever they were, they weren't here to negotiate. Reichel moved like a blur, his movements fluid and precise as he fired back at the attackers. Emma couldn't believe what she was seeing. This was no ordinary soldier. He fought with a skill and ferocity that left her speechless. "Why are you helping me?" she shouted over the chaos. Reichel didn't answer immediately. He pulled her to her feet and gestured toward a narrow alley. "Run," he said. "I'll cover you." Emma hesitated, her mind racing. She didn't trust him, but she didn't have much choice. She bolted down the alley, her heart pounding as the sounds of battle echoed behind her. She turned a corner and ducked into a small alcove, struggling to catch her breath. Moments later, Reichel appeared, his weapon still in hand. He was bleeding from a shallow cut on his arm, but he didn't seem to notice. "They're gone," he said, his voice calm despite the tension in his posture. Emma stared at him, trying to make sense of everything. "You just saved my life. Why?" Reichel hesitated, his golden eyes meeting hers. "Because I believe in peace, too," he said finally. "And because We're not as different as you think." Emma felt her pulse quicken. There was something in his tone, something that made her want to believe him. But she couldn't ignore the risks. If anyone found out about this encounter, it could jeopardize everything. Before she could respond, Reichel stepped back into the shadows. "Be careful, human," he said. "You're not safe here." And then he was gone, leaving Emma alone in the dimly lit alley. Her mind raced with questions, but one thought stood out above the rest. Who was Reichel? And why did she feel like her life had just changed forever? Forbidden emotions. The Zorathian city was quieter than usual, its glowing spires casting eerie reflections on the empty streets. Emma Carter sat in her quarters, replaying the events of the ambush in her mind. She had barely escaped with her life, thanks to Reichel. But why had he helped her? And why couldn't she stop thinking about him? Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint tapping sound. She froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the emergency alarm near her desk. The taps came again, deliberate and measured. They weren't random. Someone was outside her window, on the 20th floor. Emma cautiously moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. Her breath hitched. Reichel was there, perched on the narrow ledge as though gravity had no hold on him. His glowing golden eyes locked with hers, and he gestured for her to let him in. "Are you insane?" Emma hissed as she opened the window. "What are you doing here?" Reichel slipped inside with effortless grace, his movements silent despite his imposing frame. "I had to warn you," he said, his voice low. "You're being watched." Emma's heart pounded as she scanned the room. "By who?" "Your people." Reichel hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Not just mine. There are factions within both our worlds that want this war to continue. They'll do whatever it takes to stop peace, kill whoever gets in their way." Emma folded her arms, narrowing her eyes. "And how do I know you're not one of them?" Reichel took a step closer, his expression softening. "If I wanted to kill you, I wouldn't have saved you. I don't want this war any more than you do." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Emma saw something in his eyes, a vulnerability he was trying to hide. She hated herself for noticing how close he was, how his presence seemed to fill the room. "I can't trust you," Emma said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "For all I know, this could be a trap." Reichel exhaled, stepping back. "I don't blame you for being cautious, but I need you to trust me, even if just for tonight. There's something you need to see." Emma hesitated. This was reckless, foolish even, but something about Reichel made her believe he was telling the truth. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "Fine. But if this is a trick, you won't live to regret it." Reichel gave a faint smile, the first sign of emotion she had seen from him. "Understood." Minutes later, Emma followed him through the labyrinthine streets of Kalos. They moved in silence, the city's alien beauty feeling both mesmerizing and menacing under the glow of its twin moons. Reichel led her to an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. The structure was old and crumbling, a stark contrast to the pristine towers around it. "What is this place?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reichel pushed open a rusted door, revealing the hidden chamber filled with holographic maps and data screens. "A safe house," he said, "for those of us who want peace." Emma stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. There were pictures of battles, intercepted messages, and schematics for advanced weapons. It was a war room, but not for the war she knew. "Who are you working with?" she asked, turning to face him. "A small group of rebels," Reichel said. "Zorathians who've lost everything to this war and know it must end. But we can't do it alone." Emma studied him carefully. His voice carried a quiet conviction, a sincerity that was hard to fake. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're different," Reichel said, his golden eyes meeting hers. "You see us as more than enemies. And because—" he hesitated, as if weighing whether to say more. "Because I believe in you." The words struck Emma harder than she expected. She didn't know why, but she believed him too. and that terrified her. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from outside. Reichel's expression darkened. "They'd found us," he whispered. Emma's stomach dropped. "Who?" "The ones I warned you about," Reichel said, his voice urgent. "They won't stop until we're both dead." The door burst open, and masked figures stormed in, weapons drawn. Reichel pushed Emma behind him, his own weapon already in hand. "Stay close," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Emma's heart raced as chaos erupted around them. Blaster fire lit up the room, and Reichel moved like a force of nature, his every move precise and deadly. Emma ducked behind a console, her mind racing. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Whatever Reichel was fighting for, it was bigger than either of them. As the last attacker fell, Reichel turned to her, his chest heaving. "This is only the beginning," he said. "If we want to stop this war, we'll have to trust each other." Emma stared at him, her pulse still racing. Trust him. The idea seemed impossible. And yet, as she looked into his eyes, she realized she already had. The fallout. The council chamber of Kalos was a battlefield of words. Voices echoed off the towering walls, each Zorathian elder speaking louder than the last. Accusations flew like daggers, and at the center of the storm stood Reichel, his expression a mask of defiance. "You betrayed us, Reichel," General Vralik growled, his piercing eyes narrowing. "You aided a human. Do you deny it?" Reichel's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. "I saved a diplomat, not an enemy. If the council can't see the value in peace, then perhaps it's blind." Gasps rippled through the chamber. No one spoke to Vralik like that, especially not his own son. "You speak of peace while standing knee-deep in treason." Vralik spat. "You've endangered everything we've built." Reichel stepped forward, his voice steady. "What we've built is a cycle of hatred and destruction. You call me a traitor, but the real betrayal is pretending this war will ever bring honor to our people." The room erupted into chaos. Some elders shouted for his punishment. Others sat in stunned silence. But Reichel didn't care. His eyes flicked toward the small recording device tucked in his sleeve. This wasn't just a defense. It was a message he planned to send to the rebels. Meanwhile, Emma Carter stood before Earth's Council of Nations. The sterile chamber buzzed with tension as she presented her findings from the safe house raid. Images of intercepted Zorathian transmissions filled the massive screen behind her. These messages prove that factions within both sides are working to prolong the war, Emma said, her voice unwavering. "If we don't act now, millions more will die. For nothing." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Senator Grayson, an outspoken war hawk, leaned forward. "And where exactly did you get this intelligence, Miss Carter?" Emma hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "From a reliable source within the Zorathian ranks." Grayson's lips curled into a smirk. "A reliable source? Are we to believe you've been fraternizing with the enemy?" Emma's stomach churned, but she kept her expression neutral. "I've been gathering information to prevent further bloodshed. If you want to call that fraternizing, Senator, be my guest." The room fell silent. The tension was palpable, but Emma didn't waver. She knew the stakes were too high to let politics get in the way. Later that night, Emma sat alone in her quarters, staring at the encrypted communicator in her hand. It had been a gift from Reichel before they parted ways. His voice still echoed in her mind. "If you need me, use this, but only if it's life or death." She sighed, torn between duty and the strange connection she felt to him. She was about to set the device down when it buzzed in her hand. A single message appeared on the screen. "We need to talk. It's urgent." Her heart leaped into her throat. She didn't have to guess who it was. Far from the polished chambers of power, shadows gathered in the outskirts of Kalos. A figure cloaked in black stepped into the dim light of a flickering street lamp. His voice was low and venomous. "The human and the traitor are becoming a problem." Across from him stood a Zorathian elder, her face hidden beneath a hood. They won't be a problem for long, she said, her tone cold. We have plans to eliminate both. The cloaked figure nodded. See that it's done. The peace talks must fail. Unseen in the darkness, a small drone hovered nearby, recording everything. Reichel, crouched behind a wall, clenched his fists as he watched the scene unfold through the drone's feed. His suspicions had been confirmed. His own people were conspiring to destroy the peace process. The weight of the revelation pressed heavily on him. He had to get this evidence to Emma. But as he turned to leave, he felt the barrel of a weapon press against his back. You've gone too far, Reichel, a voice growled. It's over. Reichel spun around, his reflexes honed from years of combat. He disarmed the attacker in one swift motion, but more figures emerged from the shadows. It was an ambush, and he was outnumbered. Back on Earth, Emma's communicator buzzed again. This time, it was a live feed. She watched in horror as Reichel fought off his attackers, his movements precise but desperate. Blood streaked his face, and his breaths came in ragged gasps. Reichel, Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Hold on. But the feed cut out, leaving her staring at a blank screen. Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed her jacket and the communicator, determination burning in her chest. If the councils wouldn't listen, she would act on her own. For the first time, she realized the truth. This wasn't just about peace or politics anymore. It was about Reichel, and the fact that she couldn't let him face this alone. Allies and enemies. The underground hideout smelled of damp metal and ozone, its dim lights flickering as if on the verge of giving out. Emma Carter scanned the faces of the Zorathian rebels gathered around her. They were nothing like the warriors she had faced on the battlefield. These were outcasts, scared, weathered, and driven by desperation. You trust these people? Emma asked, her voice low as she turned to Reichel, who stood at her side. I trust their motives, Reichel replied, his golden eyes steady. They've lost everything to this war, just like we have. That makes them dangerous, but also useful. A tall Zorathian woman with a jagged scar running across her cheek stepped forward. The human doubts us, she said, her voice sharp and biting. Why should we trust her? Emma held her ground, her eyes narrowing. You don't have to trust me. But if we don't work together, this war will destroy us all. You know it, and so do I. The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing on everyone. Finally, the scared woman nodded. If she betrays us, it's on you, Reichel. She won't, Reichel said firmly. Now, show her what we found. The rebels led Emma and Reichel to a large screen embedded in the wall. A map of both human and Zorathian territories flickered to life, dotted with red markers. One of the rebels, a wiry man with quick hands and darting eyes, began typing on a console. We've been tracking the shadow group operating on both sides, he explained. They've been orchestrating attacks, feeding false intelligence, and ensuring this war drags on. Emma's stomach twisted as she recognized some of the locations on the map. These are human installations, she said. Some of them were destroyed in Zorathian strikes. The wiry man shook his head. No, those strikes were staged. They wanted you to think it was us. Emma's pulse quickened as the pieces began to fall into place. The shadow group wasn't just sabotaging peace. They were fueling hatred and mistrust on an unprecedented scale. As the meeting continued, Reichel felt a presence behind him, a faint shift in the air that set his instincts on edge. He turned sharply, his weapon drawn, but the figure in the shadows stepped forward with hands raised. Easy, brother, the man said, his tone calm but laced with tension. I come in peace. Emma watched the interaction with curiosity. The newcomer was another Zorathian, his features similar to Reichel's but more weathered, like someone who had seen too many battles. Who is this? Emma asked, her hand inching toward the weapon at her side. Reichel's jaw tightened. This is Karen, my brother. And if he's here, it's not good news. Karen smirked. though there was no humor in it. Always the pessimist, Reichel. But you're not wrong. The council knows about this hideout. They'll be here soon. The room erupted into chaos as the rebels scrambled to pack up their equipment. Emma grabbed Reichel's arm. How did they find us? Does it matter? Sharon interjected. They're coming, and if we don't move, we're as good as dead. Reichel turned to the group. Split into teams and head to the fallback locations. Take only what you need. Emma hesitated, her mind racing. What about the evidence? If we lose that, we lose everything. Reichel nodded grimly. We'll take it, but it'll make us a target. As the group scattered, Emma and Reichel found themselves in a narrow tunnel beneath the hideout. The sound of approaching troops echoed above, growing louder by the second. This way, Reichel said, leading Emma through a maze of passageways. If we can reach the surface, there's a transport waiting. Emma struggled to keep up, her breath coming in short gasps. How are they always one step ahead of us? Reichel glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. Because someone is helping them. Emma's heart sank. You mean a spy? Reichel nodded. It's the only explanation. Before Emma could respond, a deafening explosion rocked the tunnel. The ground shook violently, and debris rained down around them. Emma stumbled, her ears ringing as the air filled with dust and smoke. Reichel pulled her to her feet, his grip firm but urgent. We have to keep moving. They emerged into a cavern that opened onto the surface. The twin moons of Zorath hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the barren landscape. A small transport hovered nearby, its engines humming softly. Get in. Reichel shouted, covering Emma as laser fire erupted behind them. She sprinted toward the transport, her heart pounding as bullets ricocheted off the ground. Reichel followed, firing back at their pursuers. He dove into the transport just as it lifted off, the cabin shaking as the engines roared to life. Emma collapsed into a seat, her chest heaving. We can't keep running like this. Reichel slumped against the wall, his face grim. We won't. But first, we need to find out who betrayed us. As the transport sped into the night, Emma glanced at Reichel. She could see the weight of the war in his eyes, the burden of fighting for something that seemed so far out of reach. And for the first time, she wondered if they had any hope of winning this fight, or if they were already too late. Sacrifices. The prison cell was suffocating, its metallic walls closing in like the jaws of a trap. Emma Carter sat in the corner, her wrists bound in glowing restraints that pulsed faintly with energy. She had lost track of time. Hours or days could have passed since her capture. Her mind raced, replaying every moment leading up to this. The ambush, the betrayal, the desperate flight through Zorathian territory. And then, the face of her captor, General Vralik. He hadn't even spoken when his troops seized her. His cold, calculating gaze had said enough. She was leverage now, a pawn to be used against Reichel. The faint hum of the cell door broke her thoughts. It slid open, revealing a tall Zorathian guard who beckoned her forward. You're being summoned, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Emma hesitated but knew she had no choice. The restraints buzzed as she stood, forcing her to follow. The corridors outside were dimly lit, their harsh light reflecting off the polished walls. Her heart pounded as she was led into a large chamber where Vralik waited, flanked by armed guards. Emma Carter, Vralik said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. You've caused quite a stir. Emma forced herself to meet his gaze. If you're expecting me to beg, you'll be disappointed. Vralik's lips twitched into a humorless smile. Bold words for someone in your position. But no, I don't expect you to beg. I expect you to break. Before she could respond, Vralik gestured, and a hologram flickered to life in the center of the room. Emma's breath caught as an image of Reichel appeared, bloodied and chained. He was alive, but barely. He's been a thorn in my side for far too long, Vralik continued. And now, thanks to you, we have him. Emma's fists clenched. If you're trying to scare me, you'll have to do better. Vralik stepped closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. Oh, I'm not trying to scare you, human. I'm giving you a choice. Tell me what you and Reichel know about the rebel plans, and I might consider letting you both live. Emma's heart raced, but her voice didn't waver. And if I don't? Vralik's smile vanished. Then you'll watch him die. Slowly. Meanwhile, in another part of the facility, Reichel sat in his own cell, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. He knew Vralik's tactics all too well. The general would use Emma to try to break him, and if that failed, he would kill them both. But Reichel wasn't about to let that happen. Through the haze of pain, he focused on the small device hidden beneath his skin, a rebel implant designed for emergencies. With a sharp press against his wrist, he activated it, sending a distress signal to his allies. He didn't know if they would come in time, but it was his only chance. As he waited, the cell door creaked open. To his surprise, it wasn't a guard who entered, but Xerin, his estranged brother. Xerin, Reichel said, his voice hoarse. What are you doing here? Xerin crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. Saving your reckless hide, apparently, again. Reichel frowned. You're working with the rebels now. Worked. Let's just say I've had a change of heart. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching Vralik's madness destroy everything. Reichel studied his brother, trying to gauge the sincerity in his words. And Emma, is she safe? Xerin's smirk faded. She's alive, but not for long if we don't move fast. Back in the chamber, Emma stared defiantly at Vralik, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her fear. The general's patience was wearing thin, and he stepped closer, his voice a dangerous whisper. You think you're brave, but bravery won't save you. A sudden explosion rocked the facility, shaking the walls and plunging the room into chaos. Alarms blared as guards scrambled to their positions. Vralik turned, his expression dark. What is this? Emma's heart leaped with hope as she realized what was happening. The rebels had come. Through the chaos, the doors burst open, and Reichel appeared, flanked by Xerin and a small team of rebel fighters. His eyes locked onto Emma, relief and determination flashing in his gaze. Get her out of here, Reichel shouted to Xerin as he charged toward Vralik. Emma barely had time to react as Xerin grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the exit. She glanced back to see Reichel and Vralik locked in a fierce battle, their movements a blur of strikes and counters. Reichel, she called out, but Xerin tightened his grip. He'll catch up, Xerin said, his tone firm. If we don't leave now, none of us will make it out. The escape was harrowing, with rebel forces clashing against Vralik's troops at every turn. Emma and Xerin made it to the extraction point, where a transport waited. But as they boarded, Emma's chest tightened. Reichel wasn't with them. Moments later, he appeared, staggering through the smoke and debris. Blood streaked his face, but his eyes burned with resolve. He collapsed into the transport just as it lifted off, his body slumping against the wall. Emma rushed to his side, her voice trembling. Are you okay? Reichel managed a faint smile, his hand brushing against hers. I've been worse. But as the transport soared into the sky, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this fight had only just begun, and the sacrifices they'd made were far from over. The truth revealed. The rebel stronghold hummed with activity as holographic maps projected over the war table illuminated the room. Emma Carter stood at the center, surrounded by Zorathian and human faces alike. The once impossible alliance was finally taking shape, but the air was heavy with urgency. Time was running out. Are you certain about this intel? Emma asked, her voice sharp as she turned to Xerin. Xerin nodded, his expression grim. I saw it with my own eyes. Vralik isn't acting alone. He's working with human officials, powerful ones. They've been orchestrating this war from the beginning. The room fell silent. Emma felt the weight of the revelation settle on her shoulders. If what Exerin said was true, the conflict that had consumed both their worlds wasn't just the result of misunderstanding or hatred. It was deliberate, a tool for profit and control. Reichel, seated nearby with his injuries freshly bandaged, broke the silence. We have to expose them. If the truth comes out, it could end this war. Emma shook her head. Not could, will. But we need proof. Something undeniable. Thirin stepped forward, placing a small device on the table. A hologram flickered to life, displaying intercepted communications between Vralik and a shadowy figure. The voice was distorted, but the words were clear. The treaty negotiations must fail. Ensure both sides believe the other is responsible. War is profitable, General. Don't forget that. Emma's stomach churned as the implications sank in. This is enough to implicate him, but we need to know who that human voice belongs to. Thirin's gaze hardened. We already know. It's Senator Grayson. As the meeting concluded, Emma found herself alone with Reichel in the dimly lit corridor. His movements were slower than usual, the toll of their recent escape evident in his every step. Yet his eyes burned with determination. You don't have to do this, you know, Emma said softly, leaning against the wall. You've already risked more than anyone could ask. Reichel studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. And what about you, human? You've thrown yourself into this war when you could have walked away. Emma smirked, though her voice carried a hint of sadness. Guess that makes us both stubborn. He stepped closer, his towering presence filling the space between them. Stubbornness is one word for it. Foolishness might be another. Despite the tension, a faint smile tugged at her lips. Maybe. But it's the kind of foolishness that could save lives. Their moment was interrupted by the blaring of an alarm. Reichel straightened, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. What now? Thirin's voice came through the intercom. We've got company. Vralik's forces are moving on us. Fast. The stronghold erupted into chaos as the rebels scrambled to prepare for an assault. Emma and Reichel rushed to the command center, where Exerin was coordinating defenses. A holographic map displayed enemy troop movements converging on their location. We can't hold them off forever, Exerin said, his tone clipped. If they breach this base, the evidence we've gathered is as good as gone. Emma clenched her fists. Then we need to get it out. Now. We can't let this information die here. Reichel stepped forward. There's a way. We use the underground tunnels to move the data to a secondary location. It's a suicide mission, Exerin said, his gaze hardening. You'll be trapped down there. Reichel shrugged. What's one more risk at this point? Emma's heart tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. You're not going alone. I'm coming with you. Reichel opened his mouth to protest, but the look in Emma's eyes silenced him. Fine, he said finally. Let's move. The tunnels beneath the stronghold were damp and narrow, their walls slick with condensation. Emma carried the data drive in a secure case, her every step echoing ominously in the confined space. Reichel walked ahead, his weapon drawn, scanning the darkness for threats. Tell me something, Emma said, her voice cutting through the silence. Why do you care so much about this? About peace. Reichel didn't turn, but his voice softened. Because I've seen what war does to people. My mother died in a human bombing raid. My father, well, you've met him. This war took everything from me, and I refuse to let it take more. Emma swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Reichel glanced back, his expression unreadable. You didn't cause this, Emma, but you can help end it. Before she could respond, a sudden explosion shook the tunnel, throwing them both to the ground. Dust and debris filled the air as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the darkness. They're here, Reichel said, pulling Emma to her feet. Run. The chase was brutal. Vralik's soldiers poured into the tunnels, their weapons firing relentlessly. Emma clutched the data case tightly as Reichel provided cover, his precise shots taking down enemies with deadly efficiency. They'd reached a junction where the tunnel split in two. Reichel hesitated, glancing between the paths. "This way," he said, guiding her down the narrower passage. As they ran, Emma's mind raced. If they didn't make it, everything they had fought for would be lost. But giving up wasn't an option, not for her, and not for Reichel. Finally, they reached the extraction point, a hidden transport pod waiting at the end of the tunnel. Emma climbed in first, securing the data case. Reichel followed, firing one last shot at their pursuers before the pod's door sealed shut. The transport shot forward, leaving the chaos behind. Emma slumped against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "We did it," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Reichel leaned back, his eyes closing briefly. "For now. But this war isn't over yet." As the pod sped toward safety, Emma glanced at him, her resolve hardening. "No, it's not. But with this, we have a chance to end it." Reichel opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. "Together, then." "Together," Emma agreed. The choice. The courtroom of the Zorathian Grand Council was unlike anything Emma Carter had ever seen. Towering crystal columns refracted the pale blue light of the twin suns, casting shifting patterns across the faces of the assembled leaders. The room was silent, every eye locked on the center dais, where Emma and Reichel stood as prisoners, not as allies. The evidence they had risked everything to retrieve had been delivered. The Shadow Group's betrayal was undeniable, exposed through transmissions and records that tied both Zorathian and human leaders to the conspiracy. Yet the truth didn't guarantee justice. It had only placed a target on their backs. Emma Carter, representative of Earth, intoned the High Arbiter, her voice sharp and clear. "You stand accused of conspiring with the enemy. Reichel, son of Fraught, you are charged with treason against the Zorathian state. How do you plead?" Emma stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "Not guilty." Reichel glanced at her, then stepped beside her, his expression calm despite the storm brewing around them. "Not guilty," he said firmly. The council chamber erupted into murmurs. Emma felt the weight of their stares, the judgment in their eyes. These people didn't see her as a diplomat trying to save lives. They saw her as an invader, a disruptor. And Reichel, he was a traitor in their eyes, a son who had defied his father and his people. The High Arbiter raised her hand, and the room fell silent again. "You have brought proof of betrayal within our ranks," she said, her gaze piercing. "But that does not absolve you of your actions. Why should this council spare you?" Emma felt a knot tighten in her chest. This was their chance to speak, their only chance to sway the council. She turned to Reichel, and he nodded. They would face this together. Reichel spoke first, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "I have fought in this war since I was old enough to hold a weapon. I've seen the devastation it's caused, not just to humans, but to my own people. Entire families wiped out, children growing up without knowing peace, and for what? Profit? Power? I refuse to stand by and let this continue." He stepped forward, addressing the council directly. "You call me a traitor, but what I've done is for the survival of our people. The real traitors are those who profit from our suffering. If that makes me guilty, then so be it." The council members exchanged uneasy glances, but the High Arbiter's expression remained unreadable. Emma took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I was sent here to negotiate peace, but I found something much darker. I found that the hatred between our species has been manufactured, fed by lies and manipulation, and the cost of those lies has been paid in blood." She paused, her voice softening. "I won't pretend that humans are blameless. We've made mistakes, but so have you. The only way forward is together. If we let fear and anger decide our future, then we've already lost." Her words hung in the air, the tension palpable. For a moment, no one spoke. Suddenly, The chamber doors burst open. General Vralik strode in, flanked by soldiers. His presence was a thunderclap, silencing the murmurs and freezing the room. He looked directly at Reichel, his gaze cold and unforgiving. "You dare to speak of peace while standing in judgment," Vralik snarled. "You betrayed your blood, your people. You don't deserve to stand here." Emma stepped between them, her pulse racing. "He's not the traitor, Vralik. You are. The evidence proves it." Vralik's eyes narrowed, and he smirked. "Evidence means nothing if you're dead." He raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the room erupted into chaos. Reichel lunged forward, disarming his father in one swift motion. The two clashed, their movements a blur of strength and skill. Guards moved to intervene, but the High Arbiter raised her hand, stopping them. "This is not the way," the Arbiter said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "General Vralik, you stand accused of treason. Lay down your arms, or face the consequences." Vralik hesitated, his chest heaving. He glanced at the council, then at Reichel. With a growl of frustration, he dropped the weapon. The trial resumed, the weight of the moment pressing on everyone. In the end, the council voted. Vralik and the conspirators were sentenced to exile, their power stripped away. The war, fueled by lies, was declared over. But peace came at a price. Emma and Reichel stood before the council one last time. The High Arbiter's gaze softened as she addressed them. "You have done what many could not. You've brought truth to light, but your actions have made you enemies of both worlds. For your safety, and the safety of this fragile peace, you must leave." Emma felt a lump in her throat, but she nodded. "We understand." Reichel placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. "We'll go," he said, "but know this, peace is worth the cost." As the twin suns set over Kalos, Emma and Reichel boarded a small ship. Their destination was a distant, uninhabited planet, a place where they could start anew. The weight of what they had left behind was heavy, but so was the hope of what they could build together. As the ship lifted off, Emma looked out at the stars, her heart full of determination. Beside her, Reichel reached for her hand. "Our love was forbidden," he said softly, "but it gave us the strength to do what no one else could." Emma smiled, her fingers entwining with his. "And it always will." The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of possibilities. Together, they would find their place among them.